Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Proc-N-Roll, your guide to practical procurement, where we make procurement rock and roll. I'm Natasha. I'm stealing mic of emceeing today from my friend and common sense procurement practitioner, Zach Bashir, and also with us, our spirited innovator, Conrad Smith. Hello, guys. Thank you for joining, and thank you for all our viewers and listeners to joining us for this podcast. As we were prepping for this episode, we realized that in previous episode, number of times we were mentioning technology, whether we were talking about value generation, stakeholder engagement, or supplier management. So we found that we're a little bit overdue to give a full deep dive into technology in procurement. And that's exactly what we will be focusing on today, because that's the subject that is near and dear to the hearts and minds of all procurement professionals, whether you are part of very mature, low mature procurement organization. You certainly thinking and assessing all technological solutions that exist out there today. So let's align on the baseline. When we're talking about procurement technology, what are we referring to? Let's start there and we'll move on from that point. Zach, passing the mic on to you.
Thanks, Natasha. What are we talking about? For me, it's I really take a process lens when I look at procurement technology, and I look at the source to pay process. And there are many different flavors of this. So you've got nowadays it's intake to pay, and people mix up the words, but essentially it's just the end-to-end procurement process from sourcing and from the request from the customer or your business stakeholder through to sourcing a supplier, then doing a contract with them, onboarding them into the business and doing your due diligence, getting them onto your ERP system so they can then transact with them. And then there's also a whole suite of tools about how you manage the ongoing relationship with the supplier. So that source to pay process, when I got very familiar with it, helped frame the vast majority of procurement technology that I come across, because that's how they build their technology stack. They start somewhere along that process, and then they'll branch upwards or downwards into that process, upstream or downstream. So if you think about the source to pay process, you've got your source to contract side of it, which is the initial steps I described: sourcing, contract management, onboarding. And then you have your procure to pay, which is more transactional management, invoicing, purchase orders, etc., three-way matching. But from the transactional side of things, very often it could be finance that are running that as part of their ERP. So that's typically how I think of technology. Anytime somebody brings up procurement technology, the first question I ask myself is, okay, where in that process does this technology sit?
Yeah. So I see on your chart that there are multiple elements of strategic sourcing, supplier relationship, contract management, sourcing analytics, master data, order management, invoicing and payments, and controls and compliance. I want to ask you a question about the mother of it all, which is master data, right? Because there are two schools of thoughts, right? Is that if you operate with a dirty data, then it's going to be garbage in, garbage out. So first and foremost, you have to clean the data. And there's another school of thoughts that says that if you're going to sit and wait until data gets clean and perfect, you will never be able to analyze anything and put anything into work. You are working with multiple clients across various industries, different level of maturity. What's your philosophy, and how did it emerge over the years?
So as regards master data management, I think you hit the nail on the head, Natasha. It's absolutely crucial to get that right. But when we talk about dirty data, I think people need to, explain what they mean by dirty, right? Because you have data all along that procurement process. What I found is the most important bit of data that you need to have under control is your supplier identification or your supplier record, right? And also how that links with maybe subsidiaries or other entities that are onboarded in your business that are related to that supplier. The reason that's so important is because that supplier identifier is what can connect your upstream, your downstream, and everything along that. So that's always the first place I try and start. Think of it like this. the best companies in the world, the best sales operations in the world have, great CRMs, and they maintain great quality data in those CRMs. Every customer has a customer ID. They don't have duplicate customer records, etc. Right? And that's what allows them to manage their customer base very efficiently, because all the data gets joined to that customer ID. So procurement needs to be exactly the same. If you don't have all the data related to a single supplier, and you're not able to trace the data to that, then you're going to be missing a trick, right? So always start with your supplier master data record, right? Especially things like name, entity, legal identifier, address, location, just the basics, right? And make sure you use that same master record across your source to pay tech stack, right? So you can join it all up.
Yeah. Well, you used the word tech stack a couple of times. So, Conrad, when we say tech stack, what does it mean to you? How do you think about tech stack?
I would say tech stack is the bundle of technologies, applications, tools, whatever you want to call them, that are working together in support of that process that you're executing on. Back in that diagram that Zach showed, it was talking about source to contract and procure to pay. Like, if you break it up into these areas, I think you can talk about the tech stack that supports that process. I mean, I think there's on the second row of this diagram that says source to contract and procure to pay, the big band that's missing there. And they've kind of put it down in the chevrons below, which is supplier management, because I think supplier management itself is a process that it's not properly addressed, and you need to make certain technology decisions in that space. I've been thinking a lot about why traditional procurement technologies have struggled so much as it relates to, I mean, my whole business right now is around the supplier master data, the supplier management. And I hear so often how people are struggling to manage these elements of the process that you would kind of put in a bucket of supplier management. And I think it's because they've made technology decisions around one of these, like, call it one of these process bands, and then they've just tried to assume that it's going to be okay and it's going to fit the other process bands that you're doing. And that's where you run into problems. So as you'll see here in the diagram, I always think, like, horizontally we all need to support our transactions. And so there's a transaction tech stack. And, you can debate what goes into that tech, that, the transactions from PRPO, invoice payment. You can throw in the e-sourcing kind of things in there as well. I mean, just depending on how far you want to draw out the kind of the horizontal tech stack for transactions. But then you have this vertical, I show it vertically because there's this intersection in the middle. Natasha called it out and said, the data in the middle of these tech stacks. I love the way you said it, Zach. Like, you've got to stitch these things together with a couple of common data elements that enables you to crosswalk between all these things. But as you look up and down these process steps from, PRPO, invoice payment, on supplier management, you have onboarding, you have risk management, you have performance management, like all these different pieces may be addressed with one tool, like a tool that does it all, or it may be addressed with, different best of breed solutions that, do one thing really well.
Yeah. Conrad, let's make it practical for our procurement professionals. Let's take, for example, a new head of procurement is joining our organization, right? What is the right way for them to assess their tech stack? Like, where do they start? Like, how do they know what tools do they have versus which tools they should have? And how do they know if the tools are connected or disconnected, if they are effective, if they're efficient, if they're operating, if they are fully utilized? Sometimes you buy the tool, you buy multiple modules, you integrate some modules, you activate some other modules. Like, how can we look at it from the practical step-by-step perspective?
Well, it's a great question. I think when you show up in the job, it doesn't take too long to figure out what's operating. I mean, like in that first 100 days or whatever, almost like it put out the diagram, the format that we were talking about before with the source to contract or procure to pay and supplier management, or the tiles and build a list and like, okay, where and how are we doing each of these steps of the process? How are we addressing them? Many of them will be done with, email and spreadsheets and PDFs in a lot of organizations, but like mapping that to what technologies are in place. I mean, it's not uncommon that you'll find, for this one thing, we're using 2 different tools. We use that for direct materials, we do this, for indirect, we do that. Oh, in Europe, they're using this other tool, right? So doing an inventory across all of the tiles or the process substacks, and then just figuring out what's there, I think is really important. I think a lot of this does evolve organically, and it's worth at least periodically taking a step back and applying some strategy and vision to that.
Yeah, I totally agree, Conrad. So that's typically what I've done. Exactly what you said is anytime I'm doing a diagnostic on procurement or something like that, technology, I would map the procurement tech stack across that source to pay process. What I love about your suggestion, by the way, which is something I'd never considered, I've put many of these source to pay processes together before. I'd never thought about going vertical, right? Because you're right. I always struggle to squeeze that supplier management bit in because it's its own process. So I think definitely I'm going to take that away and have another dimension there for supplier management. But whether it's an M&A project or it's a diagnostic to understand what you've got, it's a very powerful visual when you get it all on one page, right? Here's my source to pay process, and then you can see the different tools mapped against that. And the last thing I like to do is I like to annotate that diagram to show where things are joined up, where one tool is dependent on some of the data from other tools, right? So you just draw little arrows, etc., and that can then have a visual that will just show you how complicated it is, right, and how disjointed that source to pay process is. If it all looks very neat and there's very few lines, etc., then you've got a great procurement technology foundation.
Or you're lying to yourself, right? I mean, it's easy to make things look good on paper and kind of ignore some of the complexity. When you were saying that, I don't remember who it was, you or Natasha, we can't answer all these problems just with technology or answer the questions, right? Underneath whatever you're trying to execute here is a process. It is a user experience. It's an outcome. Those things need to be understood. So there's like layers of the tech stack that you have to kind of figure out. I mean, the obvious next question is, Natasha, okay, now I know what technologies are there. Is this the right thing, or what do I need to change? And I think that comes from doing, Zach, what you were talking about, which is start mapping out the arrows, understand the user experience and impact. Are we getting the outcomes that we need based on, the technologies and the process? There's a lot of work to do after you do that inventory. But yeah, it's actually really exciting. One of the things I've spent my career in procurement, like making this stuff work better. And I just think it's fun, instead of just turning the crank, actually to build a new machine, figure out how to optimize what you have, add new technology, remove some of the technology that's not helpful, simplify it. I think under all of this, the one thing one of the big walkaway points I would make is, whatever you decide to do, you will make compromises. The big question is best of breed versus suite. Okay, one of those is one decision and one's another decision, and neither of them are perfectly right. That, suite may be perfect for you and not perfect for somebody else. There isn't an absolute answer, but you have to lay up the pros and cons and really understand what you're compromising on. Last comment on that one I would say is, IT is going to try and drive you to make, what they want in terms of the tech stack as well, right? Because IT's preferred tech stack is as few as tools as possible and just use what we have. And in some cases that might work really well for you, but most of the time they don't feel like the voice of the customer that we hear and support all the time, like this isn't working, or the outcomes that we're trying to create are not priorities for IT. Like they don't seem to care. And so they're always going to narrow down to one place, which, as I said, might be the right answer for you, but there's a fair probability that it's not. You're going to have to influence them to do what's best for the business.
Yeah, but and this is where I see it slightly differently. Procurement cannot implement any technology without tech support, consulting with tech. And it's a big question mark who actually should own procurement tech strategy. Should it be tech or should it be procurement? And I would argue that the requirement of what technology should deliver, that's the ownership of procurement. but the choice of tools, to a large degree, that actually can be owned by tech. Me as a procurement professional, I would love it to be owned by tech, because it has to all weave together, because very often otherwise organizations find themselves with 55 band-aids when they have for different types of procurement needs, and they end up with a lot of systems, a lot of tools that are disconnected, disparate, and they're not supporting the process as efficiently and effectively as they could. So
But let's call that nirvana, though, Natasha. Like, you have a relationship with IT, and they are prioritizing your requirements in the way that you need them to, and then they can, I would say under a certain condition of partnerships, they are going to make decisions that are ideal for the organization and for you. All I'm saying, I'm not disagreeing with you with most of the premise that you have. I'm just saying that that's a little bit of a nirvana partnership in terms of what I've seen in most companies, that the IT team is that deeply understanding the requirements that they're making a decision based on your requirements and your business outcomes versus, they look at their tech stack, right? Their whole tech inventory, and that's primarily what's driving their mindset on these things.
Well, procurement should be part of the overall technology tech stack. I guess all I'm saying, and my main point, is that we should not look at it as us versus them. We should try to build that marriage with tech.
100%.
And make sure that whatever procurement needs are, that they are part of overall tech stack. So let's talk about procurement tech stack specifically. Has it changed over the years? And if it had, and I know it had, because there's just been slight difference between what's on the market now and what used to be just some years ago. So Conrad, share your perspective, please, on what has changed.
Guys, I think I've shared this with you before. I don't know. But when I got to Intel in the 90s, now, granted, Intel as the tech leader of the world today doesn't really, people don't see that in them anymore, right? But in the 90s, Intel, Microsoft, and IBM were kind of like the really cool tech companies that everybody wanted to work in. I showed up at Intel working in procurement, and the technology for procurement was paper. It was white, pink, yellow triplicates. That's what, and I know 30 years ago is a lifetime for a lot of people that are listening in here, but it wasn't that long ago that there was no real technology in there to support and help us. In the mid 90s, when I showed up, it was a mainframe in the back end, these black screens with little green, that was what I started my procurement career inside of. And I just watched it completely change. Originally we were building our own, the CLM tool at Intel was the admin of the director of procurement and a spiral notebook writing down the supplier's name and a number. And that number from the supplier notebook would be typed into the Word document that this is the contract number. All seriously, this isn't that far back in history that's what was available. And now there's, a dozen different solutions or more that can do contracts for you, purchase requisition, sourcing, all of these different tiles of the process. I went back in preparation for this, and looked up Dr. Eloise Epstein's, spider diagram, because I was like, this has got to show the complexity of what I feel has happened over the last, almost decade here. And this is, for those of you that are watching in here, this is what she presented at a Scout RFP, or the Scout RFP conference in San Francisco. You can just see how thin it is. I don't think this was comprehensive, by the way. I think it was her first effort at it. But if you look to her most recent one, and she's now sort of done trying to keep track of this, and I understand why, right? Because Brooke, if you advance into the next diagram, the current spider diagram, this is overwhelming. I have a migraine just looking at it. And all the procurement leaders out there are faced with all of these organizations, tools, and technologies as possible solutions that are knocking on their door, or possible solutions that they need to consider to optimize their business. It's kind of overwhelming. I do want to highlight one thing in this thing that's just been really cool. If you look at the very, very center of that, it says Graphite Connect. Yay! We've been in the middle of that from the beginning. but the data, like the data foundation core, this is where you and Natasha were talking in the beginning. Like, data is the center that ties all these pieces together. In her early ones, I think she called it the AI module or something. I can't remember what it was. Like the AI core, that all this stuff feeds into this common core in the middle that actually makes the whole process everywhere smarter. But anyway, it has changed a lot, and the procurement leader who needs to now decide what to do has a big job ahead of them.
Fascinating, right? It's only 8 years. Only 8 years. And while the first that we presented 2017 chart only had 13 companies, and yes, it's not fully exhaustive list, but and neither is this one from 2024, where we have over 300 companies. It's just a technological innovation that occurred in procurement space is absolutely phenomenal. Zach, let me ask you a question. If procurement professional will take a look at that map and try to decide which technology they need to bring on board, they probably will be so overwhelmed that they will just fold it and throw it away, right? So working with different clients, have you figured out kind of like what is your model on assessing and advising and determining which technology would fit current needs better?
It's a great question, Natasha. I mean, unquestionably, many procurement organizations are looking at the procure tech world and thinking, what the heck? Where do I even start? Right. And I think what, unfortunately, the fallback ends up being is, oh, I'll go for an integrated suite because then I don't need to buy as many tools. I could buy one tool that sort of sits across the end-to-end process. And it's an easier sell into the business, into our tech colleagues, like we were discussing. It's an easier sell to the board. The funny thing is that even these integrated suites aren't really all that integrated, right? So even if you take an integrated suite, it doesn't necessarily have that central data core. You might have multiple different master datas across the entire areas of the suite. And the reason for that is often these suites, the way they build themselves out is through acquisitions, right? So they're not integrating 100% natively the technical bit, the data bit, right? So it runs all through the process. So I would say for most procurement functions looking at this, procurement leaders looking at this, don't fall into the promise that an integrated point solution is going to integrate everything in your data. It's just not true. The hard work to clean up your data, to streamline your processes and make them simpler and aligned, and that orchestration, as people say today, that is where a lot of the value gets generated. The other thing, speaking to lots of different customers, I think the proliferation of tech has been a headache, but it has also been very helpful for many procurement organizations of different sizes and different niches, because these tools now come with different price points and different capabilities, and now you have more options than ever. So you're going to have leaders within your industry, you're going to have leaders within a certain capability. That's fantastic, and you should definitely look there. Don't be afraid to go out there, do the research yourself, look at the Gartner reports, right? Understand who's the best player in the different areas and decide what you want to do from there. But also don't be lulled into this sense of, oh, an integrated solution is going to solve all my problems, because it definitely won't, not even from a supplier data point of view.
Yeah. And for some companies of smaller size, integrated solution or enterprise solution may simply be not the best fit, because especially depending on which industry they're part of and what their core focus. So when procurement professionals assessing their tech stack, what should be, and there's not one criterion. There are multiple criteria that they need to take into consideration. Can you share your perspective on what's more important? Is it connectivity of different systems? Is it cost effectiveness of different systems? Is it ease of implementation? Is it ability to scale as the companies grow? Are there what else comes to mind? Conrad, maybe let's address with you first.
what comes to my mind is outcomes. Like, what are the outcomes that that you really need to achieve, and building these decisions around those outcomes. You can spend so much money and so much time implementing all these technologies. It's overwhelming, but stepping back and thinking and making these decisions based on the outcome is, I'm just a common sense guy. I'm like, let's look at it from a common sense perspective, and make the decisions that will achieve the best business outcomes. Some of this is the spider diagram. And by the way, we got to get Eloise to come over and join our podcast. I'd love to have her talk through the history of the last, 7 or 8 years. That would be such a fun conversation. But I would say that the core of what is needed, in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you need to be able to order and you need to be able to pay, and so the ability to do that is generally going to be inside of your ERP, NetSuite. Our business today is still running on QuickBooks, and so I can pay suppliers through QuickBooks. It doesn't have a purchase requisition or purchase order framework for me, but it isn't a priority to my business. I don't have hundreds of these transactions going on all the time. But whatever that ERP is, that's kind of your core. And then anything that you're adding to that, there needs to be this outcome and value delivery in order to justify that investment. You talked a little bit about, like, how does it scale and how do these things happen? It's nearly impossible for an early procurement team to make a strategic decision and really go all in on the technology that they're going to be using 10 years from then, right? Because it's all changing too fast. I would say what's really important is to figure out how to think about your systems. We keep coming back to data, right? Like the data core behind all of this, because you should be able to say, you know what, in 3 years or 5 years or whenever, I need to unplug that one piece of the tech stack and plug in another one and have it not just blow everything up. And so I call this the scaffolding, right? That there is a scaffolding that the data has and how you connect your tech stack that allows you to take pieces out and put new pieces in as you scale, without having to start everything from scratch. And ultimately, I think that is the data. Like the data behind is almost what's running around and connecting all of these different systems.
I think that's such a great scaffolding is definitely something I'm going to take away as well, Conrad, because it's a great way to frame it, right? It's exactly what you said. You need to be able to very easily and efficiently swap technology without changing your process and your data and ruining your whole end-to-end piece. I would just add from my experience, I think another big sort of key to success is the process alignment with the technology that you're buying. Increasingly, we're seeing from our customers, surprisingly, actually, is a request for less customization. Right. In the past, it used to be that you'd want to bring a procurement tool in, and then you'd be asking the technology vendor, how do I make this tool fit my process? Now, I think a lot of procurement functions are wising up and they're saying, do you know what? What's the best practice process? And can I just implement that, seamlessly with the technology? Right. So I think that's really important as well, is having a process framework or an operating model framework that is similar to the scaffolding concept that Conrad talked about, which is, I've got my process clearly defined so that if I need to change the technology in any one particular area, that's easy enough for me to do without breaking the rest of that process. And minimizing the customization reduces your overall cost and your implementation time. So the more standardized you can get with your documentation, with your process, with your data, with your scaffolding, then the easier time you're going to have with procurement technology changes as they come and go. And there's a whole new wave coming with AI, which we'll probably have to discuss in another episode, because that's a whole other.
Well, let me actually combine this to what you just said. One point about customization. It's interesting that marketing often challenges procurement that this solution doesn't work for us. You don't understand marketing. We're special. Procurement can hear the same argument from R&D, from innovation, from legal, right? Yet at the same time, when it comes to system integration, very often the conversation between procurement and supplier is like, well, we're different. like, you don't understand us. We're structured, we're different company, we're structured different ways. I've been to many companies and I've seen some clients, and it may sound a little bit as a cold shower, but actually the difference is not that significant.
You mean the difference in outcomes with all these different?
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
completely
Exactly.
true. I always ask.
Transaction is transaction. We're not talking about the core of the business. We're talking about transactional aspect of running the business. And it doesn't matter what transaction represents. It's a unit, like, it's, if it goes through the process, it goes through process. It doesn't matter the type of industry you represent or type of services you buy.
Yeah, it's just not a competitive advantage, right? It's a process that needs to be executed. And in some ways, maybe the competitive advantage is the lack of customization that you enforce into the tool, because then you can quickly swap out that one and bring in another one instead of, like, I remember when I was at Intel, we we were implementing the Ariba platform. This is like back in like year 2000 kind of days. And one of the organizations, I think it was facilities, had built their own transaction tool with all of these unique things about it, right? So their stack of requirements of what they needed to, oh, well, we can't move to Ariba because it doesn't do these 175 things that this other tool does for us. And some of those things, like, I will grant that there's efficiencies that come in from a lot of those enhancements or configurations, like, for sure. Not all of them, but some of them are bringing big efficiencies that are purpose built to that organization. But they couldn't even take new technology. You know, they were living on old technology for a long time and couldn't take advantage of the automation. I mean, think about AI right now, right? Like, if you're stuck in some old tool that you can't upgrade because you forced all those customizations, and in the next 2 or 3 years, all of these components of the tech stack are going to be bringing AI, like really cool AI potentials. You won't even be able to take advantage of that because you're stuck in something that's 10 or 15 years old because you've modified it so much. So it really could be the competitive advantages not to make changes to the best practice standard that the tool provider brings to the table.
Yeah, I totally agree. Simplify. Always simplify the process as much as possible. Simplify everything.
It's kind of like, don't over customize and don't over emphasize on how special you are. Actually, instead of highlighting how special you are and how different you are from the standards, find a way to actually bring your organization, your processes to the standards so you can run it more effectively, more efficiently, and in a cost neutral way.
Natasha, I've had one of the questions that I know people are thinking in their mind is, okay, well, I came in now and I'm looking at my technology stack, or, you know, maybe it's a small business or a big business. How do I decide what to do next with my tech stack? Like, do I get a new CLM tool? Do I get, do I push for a new P2P tool? Do I push for P2P with CLM in it? Like, there's all these hard decisions. How does the procurement leader, like, act? In fact, you're always saying, let's make it practical. Like, what is that practical advice of how do you think about this and put together a game plan, for, request for budget and everything else that you need to do?
Yeah. So, making it practical, and I always go back to procurement. Stop thinking just about procurement. Think about the enterprise. What's important to enterprise? If enterprise has very large spend, let's say 10 billion plus spend, and doesn't have intake, start with the intake. If you have 57 different sources of data, try to minimize it, or try to clean it, or try to find a solution that can help you solve this foundational, like, absolutely necessary step to know where does the money go to, right? Interact often and in a very specific and targeted way with your key constituencies: tech, legal, FP&A, right? Like, evaluate the process and identify the gaps and work with this key, I don't even want to call them stakeholders. They are the partners in crime, right? It's a four-legged stool between procurement, finance, legal, and tech to understand how the process goes to, where the money goes to, who we're spending with, and is it supported by the system. But like, if you don't have reverse auction function, like, don't bother, right? So like, reevaluate how many RFPs you're sending out every year and what value they cover, not volume RFP, but the value, and then see if this step is supported by technology solutions. So think about it from the perspective that not necessarily what will make the life of procurement easier, but what will bring greatest advantages to companies' goals and objectives.
I love it. It's interesting. We're coming back to where we started, which is an inventory of, like, what is the inventory of your process and outcomes that you're trying to accomplish? Where does technology sit there? Where do you have the biggest impact and opportunity to, to advance, improve the outcome for the enterprise and improve the experience for the users?
Yeah.
It sounds like that's the way that you approach this, like that's a practical way to approach this decision.
Yeah. I think the orchestration point or the intake point, Natasha, is also very, very salient that you made, because increasingly the customer experience is becoming the forefront of, the tool selections. It's becoming a highly ranked piece of criteria, right? And I think it makes perfect sense, because your business stakeholders today who are buying things want to buy things as quickly, as seamlessly as they do their Amazon orders online at home. You see, so I think a lot of the technologies that are coming out today are starting to prioritize more the customer side of things, and I think that's definitely an area the procurement team should be looking at to really move the function forward, so that your stakeholders can be happier with you, right? So you don't hear. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we embarked on a very, very complex subject today. Technology in procurement is certainly not, it's a subject that has multiple perspectives, multiple opinions. And I'm sure that, our viewers and listeners probably have now more questions than answers, which we very welcome and would appreciate if you can share your thoughts and submit your ideas. Let me just wrap up with the last point. In the last 24 months, $99 billion have been invested in AI. $2 billion out of 99 went to procurement. So from technological perspective, AI will elevate and infuse procurement systems and procurement solutions to the heights we've never seen or observed before. Are our companies ready for this advancement? Are our teams ready for these advancements?
I think they are, Natasha. I've been looking at some research, very promising research. I think there was a paper from Wharton Business School that came out a few months ago, which showed of all the functions in a corporation, procurement has one of the highest. They had the highest usage or experimentation with AI in terms of team members using AI. So clearly, there's a yearning within procurement functions to use AI, and I feel like this year it's going to be all about AI agents, as they speak about, and there's so much scope to implement those kinds of agents to make life way better for procurement professionals everywhere. So I think I'm very excited for it.
Amazing.
We gotta have a podcast, on AI. We gotta have there's so many elements of this tech stack, like even talking about CLM or talking about, like, we're going to be talking about technology through the rest of the year for sure. There's just scratching the surface.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, our viewers and our listeners, for scratching the surface with us. Please provide your feedback, share your thoughts and ideas for the future conversations, and we will see and hear you soon. Bye.
Take care, everybody.
Everyone, bye.